we have another distinguished panel. Thank you all. And the moderator extraordinaire. So each of the centers are hosting different breakouts for the afternoon, energy, construction, and manufacturing. And the idea was each center director then would facilitate their session. Well, I called in my friend, Arlene Abbott, because I know she can do this with her eyes closed, basically. So we pulled this together. She is an amazing facilitator, background from Chelan County PUD, so she comes with an energy background as manager of the OD training at Chelan, and has been working on some major projects over the last few years, doing some private consulting. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She is my friend, my confidant, my colleague. She knows all the world craziness of my life, and my friendly world traveler buddy, Arlene.
So I want to thank this wonderful panel for agreeing to present to you, give you some of their knowledge. I'm just going to do a brief presentation or introduction of them right now, and then in a few minutes I'll ask them to talk a little bit more about themselves. We have Lee Hall from Bonneville Power. He's a smart grid project manager at Bonneville. And I said we had to have Bill in the middle because he's labor and they have to be in the thick of it, you know, right? So Bill Messenger is a labor liaison at Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO. And then last but not least, we have Chris Janak, who is the manager of the workforce planning department at Puget Sound Energy. So I have a really quick PowerPoint presentation, just eight or nine slides to show you, to put the context of the energy industry into perspective. So today, the U.S. electrical power industry is experiencing some of the most significant long-term changes in its history. Around 1990 to 2006, we experienced a big dip in employment across the energy industry. 25%, about 200,000 employees, and that was primarily due to improved production, operating efficiencies, and consolidation. We also then had reductions in education and training. Today, that employment number remains stable, more or less, but the demand for energy and consumption increases. So while the physical infrastructure deteriorates, think Eisenhower administration era, nevertheless, our electrical system is becoming more sophisticated. So there's growing political pressure to expand and integrate clean, renewable energy and energy efficiencies for three reasons: to reduce environmental pollution, to improve energy security, and spur economic development and job creation. And I think we heard that message loud and clear from the two presentations this morning. With that political pressure and mandate, utilities and governments like Puget Power and Puget Sound Energy rather, and Bonneville are responding with utilities and governments investing in new research and technology upgrades to support a smarter electrical grid, increase use of renewable generation sources, boost consumer education, expand incentive programs to spur greater efficiencies through consumer engagement. So then the question is our workforce ready? It's quite a dilemma in our energy industry because of our old infrastructure, Eisenhower. So we've got to have workers that know how to work on the old equipment and at the same time be agile and technologically proficient enough to implement the new technologies, the old and the new combined. Alan, in 2008 and again in 2013, conducted a study of 16 employers representing about 9,000 employees, and across 5 Northwest states, so Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Utah. They found that over retirements, that we are projecting about 1,500 retirements over the next 5 years. That's 17% of that current workforce across 9 occupations. 60% of our current utility workers are at least 45 years and above. Our future labor pool is smaller because our demographics are smaller, and many of those folks are unprepared. So we have a shortage of qualified applicants, especially power engineers, power system operators, and electricians. And so the competition is going to only increase. What we've been doing over the last probably 10 years, as you probably know, is stealing from each other. And that is only going to work for a little while longer, and we're all going to find ourselves desperate for qualified workforce. Students, on the other hand, and we heard that also in the executive session this morning, they view the energy field as green, with opportunities to work on renewable energy and efficiency projects that are sustainable and environmentally responsible, and building the K through 12 pipeline with relationship building is really key among all the energy industry groups right now, because they see that these young people are the future, and not only that, they're interested. And so they're building activities at all levels to generate interest. They're stressing the importance of STEM education, and we're beginning to see some best practices evolving from that. So not a solution, but a strategy for implementing solutions that is very encouraging and is statistically known to be successful, are sector strategies. And the Center of Excellence in the Wired and the Smart Grid Workforce Development Grants have employed sector strategies. I think what we heard this morning, who was it? From McKinstry, what was his name? He said, oh gosh, why did industry go to the governor's office all by itself? Why did labor go to the governor's office all by itself? It does take a village. It does take that collaborative, strategic planning to come together and partner. And that's what sector strategies are all about. So they address current and emerging skill gaps. They engage directly with industry across boundaries, and they better align state programs and resources serving employers and workers. For the information that I got from this little PowerPoint, you can go to the Center of Excellence website, to Alan Hardcastle's 2013 study, and or the nationalskillscoalition.org. They're both on there. So what I'd like to do now is to ask our panel to introduce themselves and say a little bit about who they are and what they do. And then as a first question, also react to the keynote presentation that was given this morning. So Chris, would you be so kind?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so my name's Chris Janak. Just a little bit about myself first. I spent a couple years doing international trade analysis for the federal government before I got into energy, which I've done the last 15 years. Mostly doing risk management work for trade floors and energy supply operations. But most recently I moved from finance into human resources, which is why I'm here. Now I'm doing workforce planning work. And at Puget, that also includes staffing and recruiting, compensation, and diversity work. So that's who I am and how I got here. In terms of my thoughts on the keynote, first of all, I loved it. I thought it was great. I really appreciated that. I felt that Yoram, he made fun of everybody in the room to some extent, but I also felt like he honored the values of folks across the political spectrum at the same time as he did that. So I appreciated how he tried to speak in the language that would relate to everybody in the room, and he talked about a solution that's really kind of a win-win solution that meets the needs of everybody in some way. It's a win on the business side, it's a win on the environmental side. So what I walked away with thinking is, okay, how am I approaching problems, and am I doing it the same way? Am I really taking into account where everyone's coming from, what's important to them, what they want, and trying to come up with a solution that's going to meet all of our needs?
Thank you, Bill.
Hi. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Messenger, and I want to thank Arlene for allowing me to speak to you all a little bit. I have a longer background probably than him. He's a little bit younger than I am. I originally started with a company called Weyerhaeuser, and I worked for Weyerhaeuser for 30 years. Most of that time in a power plant, running turbines and boilers and producing electricity for the rest of the plant. I learned a lot during those years, and I was very contented doing that sort of work. But one day the mill manager came into me and told me we were closing this plant down. So I spent a little bit of time looking for a job, and I was lucky enough to get on with the Washington State Labor Council, which isn't a state agency at all. It's actually a labor agency. I work for the AFL-CIO. So I work for a lot of labor institutions, and asked to speak for labor. Well, that's kind of hard to do, since it was kind of like Yoram said. Labor represents all across the spectrum. We're ultra left, ultra right, and then a bunch of people in the middle who don't know what's going on, don't care what's going on. Also at one time sat on Governor Gregoire's Climate Advisory Committee. I was the lone labor person. That committee held about 50 people. So I was the one guy over there going, but what about, you know. I think, and this kind of relates to Yoram's, I really like the guy. I've heard him several times. He's come to our office. We spoke candidly. I think that it's a matter, the carbon taxing issue is a matter of something we are going to have to do, not something we're going to want to do. I think it's going to be painful. I think it's going to be painful to a lot of industry in the U.S. And to say, and the funny thing about in an audience like that in the auditorium, is that we're all kind of in the choir. And that's a tendency to preach to the choir. We're all going, yes, I'm that way myself. But let me tell you, when you're talking to labor, you start mentioning taxes at all, and they don't want another tax. They don't care what it is. There are some people who still don't believe in climate change in the labor organization. That's the truth. Sorry to say that, but I'm not one of them. I don't want to be there, you know, for excusing them. But they don't think it's happening. They don't want another tax. All they're thinking about is the here and now. And I'm here to tell you that's learned. That's learned a lot from the employer. The employers have a tendency to go into a plant and say, if you're for something like this, we're going to shut you down. Now, luckily, we're talking mostly about energy production here, other than manufacturing energy production. And the opportunities in that are lucrative, and we'll talk about them a little later.
Thanks, Arlene, for inviting me to this. I'm Lee Hall. I'm the Smart Grid and Demand Response Manager at Bonneville Power, and that job didn't even exist about 4 years ago. So I'm the first and so far the only one. And the reason for that is that the technology is really exploding on the market and exploding in the industry. When I say exploding, it's really moving ahead leaps and bounds. And we're involved in pilot programs in the largest smart grid demonstration project in the country, run over by PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Labs in Richland, and involving utilities. We're really excited about the prospects. One of the themes I hope to talk about is really the changing nature of the industry itself. It's not like the Eisenhower era. It is really changing, and I think there's great opportunity for a lot of people to jump on that fast-moving train, if you will.
Thank you, Lee. So in terms of the changing industry, it reminded me of a comment that Larry made this morning about the machinists who went from building planes with wood to building planes with metal to now building planes with high impact plastics. And so we're in a similar situation with our aging infrastructure, and on top of that, building technologies that didn't even exist 10 years ago. So I'd like to open this up to the audience. So what did you all think of this morning's presentation, the keynote with Joachim? Any comments?
It's a strange and interesting phenomenon to me, and I think to more people in the Pacific Northwest than other areas, that there are still people of influence, power, and position out there who are still denying what climate change is all about, even denying that it is existing, that still deny that sustainability is something we have to address. And it's very frustrating to me, as in being in part of the industry, of not knowing how to combat that other than at the ballot box. And it's, you know, that's a real issue in our area. How in the world can they deny such an obvious thing? But I have a question for you on the utility side, at least. Do you have any kind of a number of the mix for electric use between residential and commercial? What is the percentage there of residential versus commercial?
That's something I should probably know, and I actually have no idea what that number is off the top of my head.
If I may, it really varies from utility to utility, and I hesitate to say what it is for our entire BPA system. Some utilities that we serve have 85% residential, and some have over 50% industrial. Maybe one plant uses up, like a Weyerhaeuser plant, may use 50% of that load on that utility. I'm presuming it's in between commercial, industrial, and residential. It's on the order of 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. I know the Portland General Electric has about half of their load, and that's, and I'm a PGE customer, has about half their load in the residential, but there's a lot of industry and commercial there, so it's about half and half.
There was a question over here, or a comment.
I wanted to share a study we had. I'm Doug Howell. I work for Sierra Club, and when Sierra Club does publications, sometimes people will question it because they think we have an agenda. We do have an agenda, so you should question it. So we did this study with a group called Synapse Energy Economics, and we asked the state to review it. So the Office of Financial Management, at the recommendation of Keith Phillips, who was here this morning, had Mark Baldwin, the head of the office, get their top modeler. And so they looked at the model that was being used, plus the inputs, and they said it's a good piece of work. If the governor wants to use the statistics in here, the outcomes, he can. And there was, what we did is we compared the job creation potential between energy efficiency, wind energy, and solar energy, both rooftop solar and commercial scale, and natural gas. And it really came down to just one table. This whole study became really about one table, and what we find is going forward that the job creation potential, if you want to compare apples to apples, you have to look at both construction and O&M, so you're not taking it out of context. You have to look at it over 20 years, you have to average it out, and you have to do it on an average megawatt basis. And only unless and until you take it down to common denominators can you do an apples to apples comparison. And what they found, interestingly enough, and it's not too surprising, is that the clean energy sources produce more jobs per average megawatt, averaged out over 20 years, than natural gas. And intuitively, people kind of get that because all those turbines are made out of state and all that gas comes from out of state. So going forward, the best opportunity for job creation, for energy in Washington State is clean energy. And that's good news.
Thank you so much. Any other comments about the keynote presentation? Any questions? Pat.
Just the opportunities that we have to work together, for utilities to work with NGOs like the Sierra Club and others in order to enact some of the political will that's going to be necessary to get things like a carbon tax in place that'll move us a little closer towards a bright future.
Thank you. So then, what was a key takeaway from the morning executive presentation? And I'd like to ask our panelists to chime in first on that question.
Sure, a couple things. One, the theme of removing waste and sort of that intersection between profits and doing well by the environment seemed to be a thing that came up a lot. It reminded me of a friend of mine who used to do sustainable manufacturing work with the Department of Commerce. And one of his main points was, you know, when he's talking to manufacturers, most of his discussion isn't really about the environment, it's just about dollars and cents. So much of the conservation work and the energy efficiency work that helps the environment goes right to the bottom line. So there's so many places where those two intersect and we can make a whole lot of progress or reframe things in a way that those intersections become clear and obvious. The other piece that came out, a lot of talk about partnerships, tons of talk about leadership, 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 leadership on the panel, which makes me think that one of the competencies we need to work on is leadership. If we're going to get this stuff done, we're going to have to be doing a lot of work on that. Now, I'm not talking about managing a department. I'm talking about leading as an individual, leading as a team member, as the head of an organization, and working with different organizations, working with people who have different beliefs than you, different values and perspectives, and getting beyond sort of pointing fingers and figuring out how we're going to work together.
Thank you, Chris. So this was a presentation that Alan Hardcastle moderated just before lunch. So what were your key takeaways about that presentation?
I really liked that second presentation. It was new. There were many different faceted people up there. I got out of that, and I know from being in industry my whole life that there has been progress made. And sometimes I think we're pretty hard on ourselves because it doesn't come fast and furious enough. Stuff like this has been embedded for so many years. Thought process has been embedded. It's one of the things that they keep talking about, getting youth in our industry, that I really dearly love to see, is we need new ideas rather than old, stagnant, 60, 50-year-old males in charge all the time. Progress in building. At my mill alone, my power plant, we had statutes, laws instituted over the years that made it tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter till we finally paid attention to what was actually going on to the process. That may not sound like a big deal to anybody, but if you were brought up the way my generation was brought up by the older folks saying, don't worry about that smell, that means money. You know, in a pulp mill, you have a process to her. If it goes out of sync, everything starts going crazy. And their emphasis was on continuing the process versus standing back, taking a deep breath, and fixing the problem. That was caused by environmental law. That wasn't caused by our company saying that's the right thing to do. That was caused by people smarter than they were, people smarter than us, standing back and saying this is not the right thing to do. And a lot of that I owe to environmentalists. Just had to throw that in there. Building architecture, smart building. Now, any building trades person will tell you that we'll build it the way you spec it. You give us the plans, we'll build it that way. So, you know, I think that our workforce is already capable of doing much better work than we're doing. They're just not, it costs too much to do it that way. For one thing, people that are building it don't want to put as much money into it as they really need. That's what gave me hope today, is I saw a couple instances of a couple construction companies there that were saying, no, we need to take a second look at this kind of stuff and let's do it right. And then when Larry talked about changing over the years, that kind of relates to what I've been going through in my life. What I do now is transition people from job loss to lucrative jobs now. So this is one of the arenas I look to ship people to, is production of electricity. You can't ship it overseas. very much. You can do a little bit between the borders, but not too bad. The problem is the apprenticeship programs are hesitant to overtrain for the field. And the way it is now, a person can't retire till he's 65. And so a lot of the old timers that previously would have already been long gone are hanging on to the very end because of healthcare and retirement and other things. So the apprenticeships aren't really taking in a whole lot of people, not as many as they need. They're taking in people. So that's where the centers of excellence become so important. It's because they're weeding out people who don't really want to be in the industry. And it's good pay. And there's a lot of union in power production, and that generally means better pay.
Thank you, Bill. So comments from any of you?
To follow up a little bit on what you're saying, Bill. It's a three-part question. I noticed, looking around the room, that there's a few of us who are in that age group where we probably should be retiring soon.
You're here.
So the point I'm curious about is, you said a little bit about that there's not enough, possibly not enough people in the pipeline. Is that an accurate reflection?
From what the statistics show, you've all heard the term silver tsunami. Pete Lamons is going over that again and again. I don't think there's enough people in the pipeline because I think there's a whole glut of, they talked about condensing of the workforce. Lean, you've heard of lean manufacturing, lean all this. What that really meant was they eliminated a lot of the waste. They eliminated a lot of their ability to pre-train people.
Right. Innovation and creativity.
Correct. So
lean.
Everybody has a job.
Right. So there may not be enough people in the pipeline, number one.
Okay.
Number two, what kind of people do you need? Sort of on Chris's point, like what are the competencies you need? And then the third point is, where are we going to get them? What's the message that's going to bring them in? Does that make sense? That question?
Yeah, it does. It's a really good question. What kind of people we need? That people that have good math skills, STEM. You know the answers to this. We need people that have good math skills, that are good workers. And how do you get the message to them? I think I have had a lot of young people come to me doing what I do. Displaced workers, high school grads, returning veterans. Three streams all coming through us. Haven't had a whole lot of good news for them for the last 10 years. It's been tough. Healthcare, energy production. The people that will be in this industry will be the people rising to the top of their class. And they're out there. There are a lot of good folks out there, but what's holding them back is the lack of employment. People need to work, and they need to work right now. And so, I think as the economy picks up, as things pick up, you're going to see a big draw for schools like the Center of Excellence and the apprenticeship. Does that answer it?
Thank you both. There was a couple of other hands.
Thank you. Arlene, I really appreciate what you said about sector strategies. I'm on a team that's doing a sector strategy for PG&E down in San Francisco on commercial and industrial energy efficiency. And the first problem we come up with is not the pipeline, it's not the colleges, it's not the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are being infused in the JATCs and the community colleges. It's demand creation. And Yoram kind of touched on this a little bit. The question I have for the panel is, we're seeing a big disconnect. If you just do a job posting scraping of jobs that are related to energy efficiency, engineers, stationary engineers, plumbers, electricians, you don't see energy efficiency or sustainability. You don't see those skills being called on by the employers. How do we address that disconnect?
In terms of energy efficiency, this might actually be consistent with what you're saying, but I think there's so much passion in people today, especially younger folks, around the environment, right? It really speaks to their values. So there's certain environmentally related positions we have where people are falling all over themselves to get those jobs. Sort of our folks that help with energy efficiency, that talk on the phones to people and walk them through those steps. It's really easy to hire extremely qualified folks. And maybe that's part of your point, that there's a lot of people coming out with those credentials and there's not enough jobs for them right now.
The demand for the thing we're all talking about, right. It's all of us in this room, I think, agree that this is needed. But the vast majority of the employers out there are not reflecting that in what they're hiring. And that's a disconnect that I know the colleges are having to deal with all the time.
If I can comment just from a government agency, and Bonneville is a government agency. I actually read an article recently in the Wall Street Journal said that the under 30 percentage, under 30 years of age percentage in all government is 7% versus the demographic profile of 25% are in the workforce. So we as a government, as a kind of acknowledged issue, are having a tough time reaching into the millennial generation, and then even the next generation after that. I forget what they're called. And just for a BPA statistic, we only have 10% of our workforce is under 30. So it's kind of a recognized issue. And we admit that, the government hiring process is very difficult. It's lengthy. We may not see as much opportunity. I think that there's as much a branding issue. If you read a BPA or government announcement for a job, it might be tough to get excited about it. And it's an admitted issue. Now, I haven't read too many Puget Sound Energy advertisements, but I bet they're a little snazzier. There's a little bit more flexibility in being able to say, it's not just energy efficiency. You get a stake in the energy future. You really jazz it up. And so I think the government utility like we are, and utilities in general, are thinking about that. How do you better brand the work that we have in front of us, which is really cutting edge, really impactful to the environment, sustainability, and really contributing to the community. We're just not getting that. I think, this is Lee's opinion, I don't think we're getting that message across.
I think the younger generation does get it more than the older generation. I think what we lack is leadership problems and people in leadership afraid to take a chance. And I'm talking mostly political here. I think that could mean, take our governor for example. I think he's really putting himself out here on his stance, and that could mean his job, but maybe that's what changes things. Maybe that's what changes things in the long run, is more politicians willing to put themselves out there and talk about what they really believe in versus the safe thing. Because I think everybody's just being safe.
Thank you. Another comment?
Hi, I'm Teresa. I'm from Pierce College, which is a 2-year community college. Sticking on kind of the branding issue. Things are changing so quickly. Everybody says STEM. Everybody says this. But sometimes the labels change, and people don't even know what to look for as far as that. If every 2 years, whatever the title of the job is, because if everybody's using LinkedIn, yada, 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 you can't even connect with them because they're looking for an outdated vocabulary word. So if there was some way to have some kind of specific consistency in the label while being a little more specific in what the flexibility of the techno needs are, maybe they could find you. But, at this point in time, it's not in the old days, you have the apprenticeship and your uncle or your father or somebody, but those days are over. So that linkage is no longer available to the millenniums and stuff. So how can you have some kind of a consistency in the title so that people could actually find you? And I am very interested in the flexibility of those specific skills that you're looking for, because STEM is kind of the buzzword, but I don't know if that's specific enough for something for industry or for green jobs or for energy. Thank you.
We have another one over here.
Hi, my name is Carol Llewellyn. I teach energy management at Edmonds Community College. We seem to have some very talented people that come out of our 2-year program with an ATA in energy management. Some of them already have 4-year degrees in many other disciplines, business, fashion, who knows. Our biggest problem is getting them past the HR department's computer. They
Please talk to the IT department about that.
There was a job at one of the big utilities. Our candidates met every criteria, even, they had 4-year degrees and everything. None of them got an interview, and these were some of our top students. Please, can we figure this out? How do we get them at least in the door?
If I can respond, agreed. Some of the computer systems, and I'm using that term generally, are not very effective at actually picking out best candidates to move to the hiring manager, for example. I'm just speaking just on my general experience. I think from the other end, though, we have an obligation to help our young folks who are in college or in training programs to help them figure out how to navigate this, because it's not just, okay, I'm going to put, if there's a word search or there's a word match, and therefore I'm going to get to the next level. They need to network, get the internships, get the connections. No, it isn't like my Uncle Bob and, you know, my grandfather, and there's still a little bit of that, though, by the way, but it's not as prevalent. How do you make them better? And it's not just in the energy industry; it's in all industry. And I have 3 kids in their early 20s, and I'm telling them, you got to get out there, network, intern, get contacts, flood the employers with your information. So I agree, but you got to come at it from multi dimensions. And we're trying I'm trying with my kids, and I'm trying as much as I can with the young people that I get in contact with.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not surprised that that's been your experience, that the conservation piece of Puget Sound's business has been growing very rapidly for years. It's actually quite a large part of our company now. And still, we have so many very, very qualified applicants for the jobs we have available doing that kind of work. It's crazy. I mean, really exceptional folks. Yeah, that's the reality right now. And even as fast as we're expanding, we still don't have enough jobs for those folks.
I'm beyond the retirement stage, so I retired twice, and I found retirement extremely boring. So I'm still at it. So my extremely bigoted attitude is step 1: close the Harvard MBA school and program. Since corporate America decided that the way to make more money was to fire people, and HR departments fired, in the company I was working at, 26 people in HR and programmed 1 computer, that's where the trouble started, trying to get people hired. The other problem to me is just simply that we in the industries need to try to figure out a way to get back to the reality that it takes physical people with physical hands and physical skills to keep this country running. There's a lot of studies out there talking about conservation is the best way to achieve some of these energy goals, okay? If you've managed to spend 25 years convincing all the kids in school that working with your hands is menial and demeaning, how are you going to get people to insulate the attic, weather strip the windows, put duct tape around the ducts under the floor? That's where energy savings comes from. And in the sector that I'm in, I can't find people who are willing to climb a ladder, carry a solar panel. You know, I can find lots and lots and lots of people who want to be designers and engineers. I can't find anybody who wants to climb up a ladder and put a solar panel on a roof. So getting back to the reality of a labor workforce that is necessary and proud of being a labor workforce is something I see as a huge gap in the entire educational system. And I think one of the ways to address that is for people in those industries like myself to take the time to partner with schools, to get into schools, to get into the classroom and talk to students at the 4th grade level, not the high school level, it's too late then, and talk about how things work, the reality of how things work. And we need people who want to work, not just punch computer keys.
Thank you very much. So we really have been talking quite a bit about the workforce, about the people that are going to be filling these jobs. So it leads us into the next question that I'd like you to focus on, and that is the labor market itself. So what specific changes and challenges do you see in the energy industry? What kinds of occupations are going to be most affected? So I'd like you all to think about that, and I'm going to ask the panel first what they think. Lee, do you want to lead off?
Well, you know, my view is that sometimes people look for that the keyword or code word in a job analysis of energy efficiency, when really, you know, just to put together our smart grid and demand response team, which is you know, advanced technology, we have engineers, economists, project managers. We have a video expert who you saw the results of that, and so this very you know, compact team is working together with all these different skill sets and lots of different backgrounds. And people in their career kind of bounce between different. Maybe they start out as an engineer and go become work in finance, and so that's it's not working with your hands particularly, you know, installing things, you know, which we need also. But I think one of the messages, maybe don't get so specialized. I mean, this kind of goes counter. Don't get so specialized in a particular area, because that might not be the area that exists 5 or 10 years from now. I can say, and this is a little bit of, we've done a lot of analysis on the business case for smart grid, meaning what do you need to invest, what do you going to get in return? We think in the next 30 years, just in smart grid technology, that's not just replacing wires and poles and generators, but new smart grid technology is going to be a $10 billion investment in the four-state Northwest region. That's a lot of money that's going to pay salaries and technology and so on and installation. So we think there's a huge market out there, and that's just a start. It bumps up into the hundreds of billions of dollars across the country. So, you know, I heard healthcare and energy, but how do you again get that message across? I'm not quite answering the question, but one of the things that I see is a workforce that has basic skills and maybe basic physical skills, engineering or technology or IT, that can quickly adapt. How many people in the IT industry walk around with a 5-inch floppy disk anymore? That doesn't happen. But boy, 15, 20 years ago, maybe I'm digging myself, that was the deal. And then before that, punch cards. People have adapted and have retrained themselves, so it's the adaptability of the workforce that I think is just as important as the entry-level piece.
Thank you, Lee. Bill?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of jobs created in infrastructure and in the electrical grid system as well. What I think is endangered is I think you're going to see anything that burns, this is going to seem like I'm preaching the choir, anything that burns fossil fuel, including natural gas, at some point is going to be endangered. I think nuclear power will be endangered. I think there's enough opposition to that. I think pulp and paper. And I think a lot of that will be because of it will be easier, especially for pulp and paper, to ship a raw product overseas and not mess with the messy stuff. I think at the end of the day, the bigger companies are going to say, you know what, go ahead and do your carbon tax, we'll just move overseas. And our industrial policy allows that right now. So I think that's a problem. As a union person, we represent all three facets, and it worries me because they are good jobs. They're very good jobs that pay well. They're a job that for the most part you can have a high school diploma or a 2-year degree and excel in this industry. I think you could probably do the same thing, but as we've seen over the last 10 years or so, the jobs that are being produced by the new green economy are not necessarily union jobs. And people who don't believe in unions think that's a fine thing, but they've also made family wage jobs, safety. Unions have done a lot of things for the workforce that we are going to lose because of this transition unless we're careful. And this way, as a labor person, I'm always at the table when asked. Sometimes I have to force my way in, bully my way in. But I'm the one who points out that we are in transition phase. Labor does want to be part of that transition for the most part. We're just so afraid that we're going to become ineffective and insignificant because we think we have a place at the table.
Thank you, Bill. Chris?
Yeah, so a couple of challenges. One, just expanding further on the aging workforce issue, that as baby boomers retire, we end up losing a huge portion of our utility workforce. The Center for Energy Workforce Development estimates that over the next 10 years, we could lose 55% of the utility workforce. That's totally mind-blowing to me. Over the next 5 years, we could lose 32% of our line workers, 41% of our technicians, 42% of our plant operators, 34% of our engineers. Those are huge, huge numbers. So we're talking about what skills and what competencies do we need for sort of the changing energy industry, but it's in the context of a huge hole that's in the process of being created right now, of folks who've been doing these jobs for a long time and have a ton of experience and skills that are walking out the door. The second challenge I'll mention is competition from a utility perspective, that as distributed generation, and in particular solar on people's houses, becomes more and more cost effective, the nature of the utility industry could change real soon here. That those solar panels on people's houses could be sort of like the cell phone was to the local phone company. That could cause a whole lot of changes to need to happen in a very short amount of time. So one thing we're going to have to do is get a lot better at working with our partners in organized labor to be able to have the right skill sets on our employees. So for example, if we're going to have we're going to stay alive, we're going to have a different business. We're going to have to be selling different products beyond just safe, reliable energy. So the folks that go out to people's houses to fix things are going to also need to be good salespeople, et cetera. That's just one example, but it's going to take a lot of partnership for us to be able to make that happen.
Thank you, Chris. Any comments? We're talking about the labor market, what's going to change, what occupations are going to be most affected.
Who is going to train those 45 or whatever percentage of people who are now going to have to take over, because industry is so lean, so much of the training has, you know, been given up to pay. So, I mean, people can go in with the basic skills, but who's going to be, are the guys retiring going to go into consulting?
They already do.
Yeah. So I'll make one comment on that. Yeah, I'll make one comment on that. One of the challenges, at least for Puget, is when exactly is it going to happen? The average retirement age at Puget has been trending up, but it moves quite a bit depending on what current economic conditions are. What do people's retirement funds look like? What's the value of the house look like? It also impacts us based on what are the incentives caused by our benefits package versus the benefits packages of local utilities, right? We get some folks who will retire early from a utility down the road, and then they'll come to work for us for 5 or 6 more years, and then they'll retire from us too. So all those things make it difficult for us to figure out when folks are going to leave. In fact, we started a big fire drill 5 years ago only to find out that hardly anyone left that we thought was going to leave. So it's tricky to invest in that pipeline, and then the people don't leave, and then you've got all these folks in the pipeline that you didn't quite need yet. You lose a whole lot of credibility, and then you got to try to get it cranked up again, and that's really the wrestling match we're having now. Obviously, a big problem is when folks do leave, if they all leave at once, we're going to have a real tough time. To your point, how are we going to do it?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit too. Coming from that industry, coming from the power plant industry, companies still do a lot of their training. We went from pneumatic to computer controlled everything, control systems, and the company trained us all. I mean, they took what they could. We do it during shutdown. Anybody that's run a power plant knows you have to shut it down for a while to get to stuff that you can't while you're moving. But I mean, they bring experts in from the outside. But the thing you also need to remember is a person who's been in that industry for 5 years, 10 years, they carry a certain amount of knowledge. Sure, there's new systems coming into place, but I believe they have a basic knowledge of how to produce power and stuff like that. What your point is, I think, is that pre-apprenticeship type basic knowledge that a lot of us didn't have when we walked in a power plant first, and that's helpful to them. But I mean, to say that you you know, you're always going to have to train people as it's changing. Yeah, you do, but there's a little bit of knowledge carried from, industry.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments about that?
Please tell me if you know where I can find line workers. That's that is perpetually, that's really difficult for us.
And I think Alan's research study showed line workers, power engineers, power system operators. When I worked for Chelan County PUD, we had, it seemed like forever, 2 types of jobs that we filled. One was certainly an entry level, like a customer service rep. We'd have 1 opening, we'd have 400 applicants. Yeah. So you could pick the cream of the crop, which goes to what you were saying a little bit earlier about you had great people at Everett or Edmonds College and they didn't even get in. So that could be part of it. At the other end of the spectrum, Chelan County PUD today, I would bet you anything, has openings for line workers. Can't find them. Engineers, can't find them. Power system operators, can't find them. So there doesn't seem to be a middle ground too much. It's one or the other. Jim, do you have a comment?
When you say that, do you mean experienced linemen, experienced operators?
Yes.
That is the problem. I know my old company, PG&E, we trained a lot of people, and utilities up here in the Northwest, there's a lot of ex-PG&Ers that are working up here. We felt like we were one of the training facilities for the Northwest. But I think if the utilities insist on hiring people with experience, then how does a young person get into the field?
So there's truth to that, and we have our own in-house training programs where we take in folks really pretty much off the street you really don't need to have experience. It's more demonstrating aptitude. But that takes a lot of years and it takes a lot of money. And our company, as well as much of the utility industry, is in an environment of 0 to maybe 1% budget growth because our revenues aren't growing faster than that. So we've got to hold our costs as flat as we can. And so that puts people in decisions to do how many folks am I going to hire to make sure I have in the pipeline when I don't exactly know when the rest of my workforce is going to retire. So you know what I'll do? I'll put that off 1 more year. We'll do that program next year, and in the meantime, I'll try to hire an experienced person to plug the gap. But you can only play that game so long before it comes back and bites you.
Yeah, one of the things I've told my students, and that if they didn't get the utility job immediately, go out and try to get a job with a related industry and get some experience. And I've had a number that have told me that after working 2 or 3 years for a contractor, they were able to get their utility job. Mm-hmm. But it's a tough spot. Another comment on this issue of the changes in the utility industry, if we don't get economic storage options, the utilities job is going to be a much worse one because wind and solar is not dispatchable. We have the potential in California where they might have 4 or 5, like 10,000 megawatts ramping. If they get enough solar, when the solar comes down at night, the residential load goes up. There's a tremendous load following problem that's going to occur, and without extensive storage, the utilities are going to really be hard pressed to manage the system. I guess the other comment I'd make is that renewables, you've got to tell the public that most of the renewables are going to, if you go heavily into renewables from the generation side, you're going to raise the utilities costs. Because you're going to have to put storage in or something to back those non-dispatchable resources up, and rates are going to go up significantly. And I don't think the public should be fooled about that.
Thank you, Jim. So I'd like to move us along to another question now, and it's really closely related to the labor market, and that's about skills, and it's a 2-part. So what are the new skills that you're seeing emerging, that you're looking for new applicants possessing these skills, so new skills? And then secondly, what are the current skill gaps So, for example, with line workers. So it's a two-part question, and I'd like to ask the panel what they think. Lee.
Very, very quickly, you know, at the entry level and the technical skills around information technology, you know, computer skills, and especially as it relates to telecom and communications. I think those are the areas that are really going to explode, because smart grid is really about two-way communications and how do you manage those multiple channels, and then how do you use computing power to automate decisions by which you can most efficiently use energy, produce energy, and use energy. It's a different paradigm. You know, the paradigm we've used in the past is all central generation that serves load, whatever load happens to do. Now we're saying, okay, here we have this variable generation, including solar and wind and distributed generation on small solar on houses and so on. How do you create the load to help? You know, that's part of the equation. In fact, some of those, not just those concepts, but that's in practice right now in places like Denmark and other parts of Europe and South Korea and parts of Japan. So it's a really different paradigm. So to me, it's communications infrastructure, a lot of telecom infrastructure. There's a lot of skills across the computing, telecom, communications spectrum. I think they're important.
Thank you, Lee. Bill.
Okay, I have a little bit different point of view on this. As I told you, there's three streams feeding the market right now.
Have you pulled this up?
Returning vets, dislocated workers, people who've already lost their job, and I forget what the third one is. But I think this generation, high school grads, college grads, I think that this generation is a lot smarter than my generation. I think they come with a lot of skills. If I had some criticism of this generation and what their skill gaps are, it's soft skills, stuff that, you know, how to sell themselves, how to be to work on time, how to sell themselves, because that's part of getting a job. Is you need to be able to sell yourself to your employer. So you have to have all the STEM stuff. I mean, we all know that. You need math, science, technology, all this stuff. But you also need to have a little bit of patience and a little bit of soft skills. And I see a lot of the younger people, especially on the union plants, to where it's all about seniority. They don't want to put any time in the bottom. They want to go right up to that top job. So if I saw any skill gaps, it's not so much the education, because I really think we're facing a pretty smart generation that gets the renewable resource part, by the way. It's that we need older people to retire, and we have no jobs. I mean, they're just, I deal with this every day. I mean, we can talk about, you know, a shortage of skill all you want, but I see 1,000 SPIA engineers walk out of Boeing. And then people tell me I can't find an engineer. Well, I have a list of 1,000. And they may not be specific, but they've got that basic. So maybe they need skills upgrade, but not that entire, they're talking like, you hear employers talk like we can't find a millwright. I have a list of 100 millwrights. We've shut Kimberly-Clark down. We've shut Weyerhaeuser down. I have all kinds of skills out there. Again, they may need skills upgrade because industry has a tendency to put people in a box, and we only want you to do this part of your skill set, and so they atrophy. But I don't see the skill gap everybody keeps talking about as much as probably the employers do, because the employers are required to get a perfect employee every time. That's pretty hard to do.
Thank you, Bill. Chris?
Yeah, I think actually somewhat consistent with Bill, more so than new skills. What I hear is around existing skills and competencies, but with a twist, or new combinations of existing skills and competencies. So with respect to smart grid, for example, we've got plenty of engineers who understand our electric system. We've got telecom people and we've got IT people. What we really don't have at Puget is people who understand all three in enough depth to help us move smart grid initiatives forward effectively and efficiently. So there's skills that are there now in many ways, but we need even one person, ideally. Obviously, we also have teams. That helps. Another area would be where it's an existing competency, but with an important twist, would be the folks that service and work on our wind turbines. The operations people tell me it's not that different than the underlying skills and experience you would need to work on some of our other energy generation units. The twist is that it's 250 feet up in the air, and you have to go up and down stairs, a whole lot of stairs, a ladder all day long to do it. So a lot of our, experienced folks don't necessarily want to move over and start doing that. So that's actually an area where there's a lot of opportunity for folks that don't have a lot of experience to get into it. And it's one of those areas that really fits well with the passion that folks have for doing good by the environment. Those are two examples. A third example on the soft skills side would be customer service skills. That's going to be more and more important for the folks, our folks that go to people's houses to fix problems, to be able to sell stuff while they're there in order for us to be able to sustain our business.
Just a quick add-on, if you don't mind. I agree with Bill and Chris 100%. And so just in our small smart grid and demand response team, for example, I look for the ability to be a team member, communicate, lead in some cases, and sometimes that on my part or other managers' parts takes a little risk because they may not have that technical skill that popped out of the computer down at HR. Well, that's not what I'm leading with, or that's not my primary focus. Because actually, with those soft skills, you can go 1,000 miles. With technical skills, you can fill in the gaps there. So I think that's the emphasis that I have. I'll just share that.
And let me add on to that leadership piece that Lee just mentioned. One of our big problems is on the operations side of our business, filling supervisor roles. That we have trouble getting folks that are coming up through the trades to be interested in taking on those supervisor roles. So what do? Then we use engineers from elsewhere in the company, move them sideways, which is great, except for they don't really have the experience needed to make that emergency decision on, do I turn this wrench and shut this off right now or not? So it's a really difficult situation for us to deal with. We're trying to figure out what do we need to do to be able to make sure we find folks that are in the trades that are interested in being leaders and have the acumen and help develop that. So we'll be filling those supervisor jobs from folks who came up through the trades.
Other comments? Very interesting. Yes.
Hi, my name is Rob Park. I'm actually a party crasher. I'm a recently retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, so I have supervised for 20 years. Just a couple of comments. Last 10 years of my career I've spent in the communications, public affairs, public relations arena with the Army. And one of the things I see, and it's been talked about a little bit amongst the group, is this notion of branding and messaging and showing progress. So as a group, we need to decide what is our narrative. And then once that narrative is then established, we need to demonstrate progress, because this is going to be a long-term, generational objective. And until we can show, I think the fourth graders get it. It's, people my age that have grown up old school. I'm only 43, but I grew up old school where, I did smell the carbon emissions in the coal plants. I'm used to that. So the fourth graders get it. Now it's going to be a generational effort, and we have to, in our narrative, be able to demonstrate progress to that upcoming generation, that they have to be able to continue and sustain this effort. And then my second comment is then, with relation to the labor, and you talk about, the required soft skills of dependability and teamwork and communication, but yet on the job announcements, the HR computer screens for technical skills. So I see a gap there. We've got candidates that have soft skills, but how do they demonstrate that to the HR manager to get in front of the hiring manager for the interview? Thank you. And I'm looking for a job.
So related to that, we used to say hire for attitude and then train for skill sets. Yeah. And now what I've been hearing the last couple of years is employers want both. They want both the soft skills and they want experience in the technologies. And so I'm just throwing that out. Am I hearing that? Are you hearing that? What do you think?
I think you already heard, Arlene, one of the reasons, and a big reason, is the squeezing of budgets for that on-the-job training, where you could take somebody with all those dependability skills, take a veteran, and by the way, I'm a 20-year Navy veteran, thank you very much, and you know, hire that guy or gal that has served their country and has those, and by the way, not just, you know, dependability, reliability, teamwork. There's some awesome technical skills that people out of the Army and Navy and Air Force and Coast Guard and Marines are coming out with. But beyond that, so you hear me get pretty excited about this. I think we have to kind of recalibrate. Now, the federal government has a point system that you can get 5 points for being a veteran and 10 points for being a disabled veteran, and that is supposed to, at least programmatically, overcome that kind of issue. And Congress and the to their credit, institutionalize that. We don't always pay attention to that as much as we should, but at least it's a signal saying you should do this. So I guess my point is that yes, industry does want that, but we're operating with such low. First of all, we don't want to risk hiring somebody and then not working out. That's a big risk that managers nowhere want to take anymore. And secondly, we don't have the budgets to really have an aggressive on-the-job training program where you take that person with great general skills or great background and great aptitude and some technical skills and train them to specifically to the job. I think you've kind of heard that already. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
This might be a shameless plug, but it is related. I'm Allison Pugh, and I work at Edmonds Community College, and I'm also the principal investigator on a National Science Foundation grant, and this relates to skills. We are publishing today. It will be hopefully over in the registration area. We've been told sometime today it's going to show up. It's a book. It's skill profiles. It's related to a skill standards that you may have seen come out of the Center of Excellence before. Alan Hardcastle and Sally worked on it, as well as myself and Tom Barr. It has skill profiles for energy management, project and program managers, as well as commercial building analysis. So those are the two areas that we worked with industry on in our project. So we have a publication on those profiles, as well as how to integrate them into curriculum and assess them against curriculum at educational institutions or training programs. So just a little plug there.
Yeah, Allison was a plant in the audience.
That was shameless.
Shameless.
Follow-up plant here. We took the results of the research and applied it to and assessed our own performance at trying to answer the question, to what extent do we actually teach the skills that industry asked us to teach? And we did okay. But the broader issue is somebody's got to teach these skills. And if you think you can offload it all to the community colleges, that's unrealistic. And at the same time, I empathize with your bottom line. So what kind of a greater accord can we come to here to evolve a system whereby the right people can show up at your door with somewhat the right skills, or at least the right cultivable skills, so they can quickly get up to speed. We try to emulate this as much as possible in the classroom with, our buzzword is real world situational problem solving, and we do that as much as we can, but we've only got so much time and resources to be able to pull that off. So I'm throwing that out to you all as far as where can we go? I mean, we can't just keep passing this educational buck back and forth to one another. And we're all and I recognize we're all trying to do the best we can.
So that really brings us to this whole issue of solutions. So Who gets trained? How do they get trained? What do we train? Who can do it? How do we work it into the budgets? Solutions. Anybody? Bill.
I wasn't looking at solutions on your level because I think our problems are much larger than what you're speaking about. I think that for one thing, we need jobs. I mean, I know that sounds stupid to say something like that, but the jobs aren't there. What has caused the jobs to go away is our industrial policy. Every time we try to protect jobs in this country, somebody stands up and says that's protectionism. But nevertheless, we see jobs offshored all the time. That's what I do for a living for labor councils. We write Trade Act petitions, which tries to bring retraining money in for people who've lost their jobs due to foreign influence. That hasn't slowed down. I mean, not so much in the energy production, unless you're talking about pulp and paper, but we have a tendency to, the systematic change I'm talking about is we have to start thinking about what's important, not only to our country, but to ourselves. And that is, it seems like we're after the almighty dollar too much, and that we should pay more attention to life and pursuing, I don't know very many people who enjoy their jobs anymore, but lose that job and see what you think. Then all of a sudden it's a big deal. But we ship far too many jobs overseas, so the systematic changes I'm thinking, and this comes from a lot higher policy than this room's ever going to do. I mean, we can influence it, but we need some kind of industrial policy that not so far as protectionism, but that's fair. Because most of the time we do, as Americans, we do a really good job at our jobs. We're very inventive, very proactive, but sometimes we're not the most cost effective, or maybe arguably we are. It's just, you can make more money somewhere else where they're exploiting their people. So I wasn't really, with that question, I wasn't really going to go to where you were thinking, because I think we have a much bigger problem. I think we train the community college system's too hard on themselves. I think they do a damn good job of training. I think our employers here are forced to do stuff that they know isn't right, just by, I mean, who supplies these people with their money? Taxpayers. Nobody wants to pay taxes. I mean, even if it's for the very best reason. We're afraid to pay more taxes, and we're not afraid, that's one thing we're not afraid to speak up about. We don't want to pay more taxes. Well, how are they supposed to hire anybody if they don't have the money to hire people? So our problem is chicken and the egg. I mean, who came first?
Just to clarify, BPA is not dependent upon tax. We are fully self-funded, and really one of the only agencies in the country that's fully self-funded. We are funded by the price of transmission and power that we sell. So we are kind of unique across. We are a government agency, but we operate like a business. So,
but you are dependent upon.
We are absolutely dependent upon the rates that we charge our power and transmission customers, and we try to keep those as low as reasonably achievable, again, for economic benefit of the region. And the utilities we serve, of course, their revenue is based on the rates that they charge their own customers, the end customers, you all, for example.
So public sentiment.
It could be a public sentiment issue, but to answer you, if I may just,
we'd love it.
The big picture, sort of the overall, I'll say a policy issue, is I might take the other end of the spectrum, and that is, sometimes solutions are very local, just even as local as my work group, taking somebody on and taking a risk with somebody that has aptitude but may not have that specific skill set, and you train them. So I think we do, in spite of the budget crunches that we do have to make at a very local level in organizations, in industry, a commitment to train people, and sometimes to extend ourselves to hire folks who may not fit the classic profile, might be not a right term, hire a veteran. And again, I'm getting up on that bandwagon on that podium, but I think that there's opportunities. We need to take more risks. We need to invest more of our time as leaders and managers in training individuals who come on board, and that I think is really important. So sometimes it's not large policy, but how we treat our people on the shop floor, in the workplace, out in the field, and how we train them to bring them on and as positive and satisfied workforce.
So let me ask a follow-up question then. As people, more and more experienced people retire, and there's less people to fill that same pipeline, and of those less people, many of them are not as qualified because they don't have the experience. So do you foresee the industry taking more risks as you get more desperate, frankly?
The energy industry and electrical utility industry is probably the most risk-averse industry, as we should be, because we keep the lights on. We deliver power 24/7, 60 hertz, and 120 volts at your outlet. And you expect that, and have a right to expect that 100% of the time. So we're a little bit risk-averse. It's how to kind of, even on the kind of local level, in the HR departments, at the manager level, in the work group level, to kind of break through those and say, we're going to take a risk on this guy or gal, and we're going to bring him on board, we're going to train him. And that's, again, I'm getting back to the thing about that being local. I think that also, that tone has to be set among senior executives in our companies. And I'm seeing that, actually. I'm seeing that first of all, recognition of the real challenge, one might even say even a crisis in retirements versus bringing the people on, and asking individual managers and work groups, what are you doing about it? Because I think the solutions can, rather than being institutional solutions, can be kind of locally grown. And quite frankly, I'll just use an example from my submarine experience, that commanding officers were sometimes judged on how well they trained and recruited, retained and trained people, rather than just, that was a real metric. So I think that part of our issue is, how do we measure managers, supervisors, vice presidents, whoever's in the chain of command, how do we measure their performance? Are they retaining, training, and do they have their own plans for managing it? So you can see, I kind of thought about this a lot, because I try to put my talk into action sort of in our work group, but it's something that needs to, I think it needs to happen in every company.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say that given how many folks we're going to lose over the next 5 to 10 years in our workforce, and given the changes that are going on in the energy industry, I think there's also an important diversity component to this, that we can't afford to have a segment of our population that we're not tapping. And so Puget's working really hard to do a better job to make sure that we're not excluding a part of our population in our workforce. So one thing we've done is create our pathway to apprenticeship program in coordination with organized labor in the state of Washington, to bring in people, effectively bring in folks that if you've got a high school diploma and you got a C in algebra, then you can sign up to participate in this program. And you'll go through some aptitude tests and some interviews, and you'll be ranked according to how you did on those aptitude tests, not on your experience, but on your aptitude, because we know that not everybody has the same opportunity to gain that experience. And so far, in the few years that we've been running that program, has been very successful in helping to diversify the pool of folks that are going to become apprentices, and including in the wire area. So we're working hard on creating that pipeline and making sure that we're accessing all parts of the labor market, and then we're not missing on key areas where we could be getting those skills.
So I'd like to move us to our last question about solutions and next steps. And I'd really like to hear from a broad spectrum of answers here, certainly from industry. I'd also like to hear some responses from labor. I'd like to hear from people in the community college and other folks in this room that represent various sectors. Mark, perhaps the veterans. So as we talk about next steps, what do you see would be best next steps that would be workable, that would produce real tangible results, and any strategies to implementing those steps? Lee?
Well, boy, that's
In 20 words or less.
Well, I think we ought to, you know, not just at my level of supervision, but engage the entire chain of command, so to speak. And I'm a chain of command guy, and from the CEO on down to the shop supervisor, the floor supervisor, or the team lead. We need to engage everybody, and it needs to be a priority. Now that seems like a lot of preaching, but what are next steps? Is the first step is, hey, you got a problem. We want you, CEO, to talk about what is your group, whether it's a Puget Sound Energy, and I want to put Barr, CEO, in it. You saw him on the video. He's a terrific guy. We love him. But you know, what's the plan? This has to be a priority, and it's actually been listed as a strategic risk for BPA. Puget Sound Energy probably has another by a similar name. It's a strategic risk for our industry if we don't do something about it. So I think you're going to see more movement about very specific plans at the company level and very specific plans at what I call the local level, you know, team level, to make something happen.
Thank you, Lee. Bill?
I think I can be pretty short on this. I think the key to everything is education. And by education, I'm not just talking about, I am talking about community college and wherever. I'm also talking about home. I mean, all these generations we've been teaching our children, you want to be a doctor and a lawyer, it goes back to your point. There are just all sorts of professions that we need. But I do believe that we need a well-educated generation, not just in STEM, but in environmental sciences. You know, stuff like just the knowledge of what's out there, and don't try to sweep things under the rug. So education's the most important thing.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, kind of putting my recruiter hat on, I think a big area where Puget can do a much better job is doing a better job of telling our story. And you talked about that earlier. I mean, having been in the energy industry for a little while, and I go to a cocktail party or something when I don't know a lot of people, I never quite know what the reaction's going to be when I tell them I'm in energy. And a lot of folks, they don't have a real nice reaction to that. You're in energy? Oh my gosh, you must be a pretty bad person. You just care about money.
Well, that's the HR.
right. Just us in HR. And so, so how do we move away from that dominant story and embrace a lot of the opportunities there are in energy industry to make a positive difference, and especially for the environment, especially around conservation? If you talk to folks who work at our wind farms, they're extremely proud of where they work and the difference that they are making. It's not just a job, it's a part of their heart. They have a lot of passion about it. They're living their values. So how do we tell our story and frame what we do in a way that's going to attract more people to see working in the energy industry as an opportunity to make things better and to change things?
Thank you, Chris. Do we have anybody? Mark.
So I think it boils back down to collaboration again. I'm not very good at joke telling, but I think this is a funny joke. It came through an NPR story. So almost all of the Chinese millionaires are sending their kids here because here they know that the colleges are going to train them in critical thinking, innovation, and creativity. They don't want to send them to Chinese schools. So what does that tell us about what we have and what we're not really tapping into? I think that I'm in community college, but I've also been out. And what I think community college don't do a very good job of is taking that last quarter or two and giving internships to people as credit and sending them out to people. I talked to Troy Nutter. He's more than willing to have interns from our CSR program come and spend time at Puget Sound Energy. And those are the kind of programs we need to build out, I think. Community college needs to be flexible, industry needs to be flexible, but I think that's the way we get this done. The training component that we're all talking about. So.
Internships, great. We have a really strong engineering internship program that brings in a lot of folks. I would like us to be stronger at internships in other parts of the business, but.
Okay, thank you. Another comment?
I'm part of the Clean Energy Technology Advisory Board for Shoreline Community College. And one of the drums I've been beating lately is that there's too much lip service and not enough real action. Shoreline Community College has a very good clean energy technology program. It is surviving without a director and on 4 part-time professors and 3 volunteers. So we can sit in the room like we did this morning and hear that there's an emphasis from the governor's office on moving our economy into a clean energy technology economy, but that commitment doesn't go down to the base level of the community college needs a director for their program. I don't know how you solve that problem other than, like I said earlier, at the ballot box. People that aren't up to speed in what renewable technology is and still deny global warming and still deny sustainability need to be removed from government. We have to get involved at that level. We have to talk to our representatives. We have to go have coffee with them when they're not in session and tell them how we feel about these things. Tell them that we are involved and that we care and that we want it to change. So I also wear another hat. It's called the King County Veterans Service Center, where we try very hard to get veterans to come in so we can help them find jobs. It's a difficult thing because of that emphasis on those technology buzzwords in the computerized application screening process. So we got to get past that and get good people hired.
We've got time for one more question, and I see Allison's hand went up.
Yeah, so following up on this gentleman's comments, thinking about it's not just the big picture in the politics, it's also what happens in our organizations and our institutions. And following up on Ron's, Dr. Landgrau's comments this morning about leadership and what are you doing when you go back. And I really feel strongly about this. I think one of the premises for the idea around the topics here today is that we have these goals in the state of Washington to meet these carbon reductions over time, and the work group that was established last year around this topic, the Climate Executive Work Group, basically the work coming out of that, they said, no way are we going to meet these goals. We are not going to meet these goals. And it's not a surprise to me that we're not going to meet these goals, because I sit into a ton of meetings at where I work, and it's just not at the top list of priority. It is not. It gets talked about, but it falls to the bottom. There are all these other competing factors, and it always loses. And so the question is, how do we drive this to prioritize it at our own institutions, wherever, on advisory boards, whatever we're doing in our communities? We need to be advocates ourselves and not just wait for the politicians to do it and not wait for industry to do it. We are industry. We're working people. Who are we? What are we doing? You know? So that's my comment. It's not really a question, I guess.
Thank you so much. It's been a great session. One of the things that really inspired me or gave me hope from the keynote this morning was when he talked about the small left side of the room and the small right side of the room, but this big hunk of people that were in the middle, that were, he didn't call them the silent majority, but I would. And so I think what Allison is saying, we are they. And so we can all do something. And I believe that your input today has helped move that forward. And I thank you so much for coming to this session. And in particular, I thank Lee Hall, Bill Messenger, Chris Janak, and our scribe, Tom Barr.